and welcome to Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. This is your co-host, Sam Marvin. I'm here with my co-host, Sean. Sean, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Sam. Episode 23 is what we're covering today, and that is the Rankin and Bass Return of the King, animated Return
Indeed.
of the King.
Hard movie to get your hands on. We'll talk about that in a second. Let's begin by thanking you all for listening to us today. If you are a first-time listener, please go ahead and subscribe to our podcast on whatever sort of podcast app you have. If you're watching on YouTube, please give us a like, subscribe to our channel. If you have the desire to follow our updates, please find us on Facebook. You can like our page there, Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. If social media isn't your bag and you prefer, email elvesringsnerdythings@gmail.com. If you're a longtime listener and you would like to support this podcast, please consider subscribing to us via Buzzsprout. There are multiple tiers at which you can support. Every bit of help is appreciated. Thank you to our current subscribers. Your help is allowing us to continue improving our software, get on YouTube, spend time doing those edits, and it is much appreciated. Before we jump in, final spoiler disclaimer for the animated Return of the King movie, the Peter Jackson Return of the King, and the Lord of the Rings books.
They're all fair game, and as we talk about this film, I don't know, I'm really interested. We already covered the Rankin and Bass Hobbit a few episodes ago, and then we covered the Ralph Bakshi animated Lord of the Rings, which neither of us were entirely fond of the Bakshi interpretation.
No.
But we're back to Rankin and Bass, and I'm excited to see what you thought about this film. I will say, this is kind of like my overall thought that I will give. I thought this Return of the King made me want a Fellowship of the Ring and Two Towers by Rankin and Bass.
Yes.
If I could go back,
yes,
and I could buy whatever studio was making the decisions to make these, I would really push for a full 3-part Lord of the Rings, because they did well with this Return of the King.
They did, and I think similar to, well, so let me just, now that we have watched all 3 of these animated Lord of the Rings movies, both of us are very familiar with the Peter Jackson live action movies. I am so grateful that these animated movies came out when they did, because I think it really showed how to not adapt the Lord of the Rings and Middle Earth in a theatrical release or in a movie format. And I think, I'm looking at all of these movies, especially the animated Lord of the Rings and this animated Return of the King, and I'm seeing things that Jackson did, visuals that are similar, or maybe even just some story stuff that was similar.
Well, stuff he stole, for sure.
Some stuff he stole. We've talked about the proud feet moment right up. I think I was doing a little bit of research, and I think Jackson did say he took that directly from Bakshi as kind of an homage, kind of like a tip of the hat. Apparently Bakshi was really salty about the live action Lord of the Rings. Like, he was like, I don't know why they didn't ask me for my opinion on it all. He was like, he wanted to be involved somehow, but nobody called him. I don't know.
Yeah, because what you made was awful.
It was awful.
Why would they want you in?
I don't know. So I'm glad that I'm glad that those movies existed. I would say this Return of the King was better than the animated Lord of the Rings from a visual perspective. Absolutely, no question. The animation style of Rankin and Bass is better than the rotoscoping Bakshi.
Detail. There's detail in
there's actual detail. And there were certain scenes that were absolutely phenomenal. Some of the story choices in doing the adaptation are questionable. And I was doing a little bit of research about the kind of production of this movie specifically, because I think both of us, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there was an assumption that Rankin and Bass knew that Bakshi was going to make Lord of the Rings. That was going to include the Fellowship and the Two Towers. So they just said, oh, let's just do Return of the King. that turned out to apparently not have been the case. And they had always planned to do The Hobbit and then do Return of the King, which this is not a visual podcast. Sean just had a very puzzled look on his face, which I share that puzzled look. Why would you just do The Hobbit and the Return of the King and then do the Return of the King in the way in which you did? Because it seems like you kind of need the backstory of how did we get all of these people here. So that being said, let's jump into the Return of the King, specifically focusing on those adaptation choices, which either landed or didn't land. Sean, what are the things that jump out to you?
Yeah, so I think in terms of structure for this episode, we're going to kind of do what we did for The Hobbit, and Sam and I both took notes. We're going to go through kind of from beginning to end, and we will cover all of the things we liked and didn't like and all the little details as we go.
We should say, go out and watch it, because it's definitely worth watching. It's
Oh yeah, do you want to
about 90 minutes?
Your viewing? Because so I'll start by saying that when Sam and I have my qualms with Amazon, but the 2-day shipping is pretty phenomenal. So I ordered it when Sam and I talked last week. We're going to do Rankin Bass Return of the King. I just ordered it and it got here in 2 days. Sam, how did you approach getting the material to watch?
So I thought that I would be able to stream it either on demand from my cable provider on one of the various streaming services that we have. I thought if that didn't work, I would be able to buy it on YouTube. That's what I did for the animated Lord of the Rings movie. I think I mentioned this before. I own The Hobbit on DVD and VHS, although I did end up needing to stream that one too. So this one, I didn't do the groundwork, and I had to watch on YouTube a compilation of all of the movie that was sliced into various, somewhere a minute and a half, somewhere 5 minute long videos. And so to top it all off, it had Turkish subtitles. So I had quite I won't say it was annoying. It was a unique viewing experience. And I think that there was at least one occasion where whoever put the videos together misordered them, but I won't let that color my commentary about this too much. That being said, if you would like, we recommend that you watch this movie. Just order it, find it on DVD. That's been released a couple of times relatively recently. I think, Sean, you had the deluxe edition.
Yeah, I had the deluxe remastered. So mine came out in 2014, I think.
There you go. There's also an edition that came out on September 11, 2001. That's just a coincidence. Haley pointed that out when we were talking. She thought it was noteworthy. She was doing a little...
Why do you need to preface that it was just a coincidence?
Hey.
I mean, clearly it was.
I'm assuming it was.
I don't think there's anybody out there going, oh, conspiracy between...
9/11 was an inside job from Rankin and Bass. Anyway.
Okay.
So
sorry, that got me for some reason.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Got me off track. Adaptation choices.
Yeah. You asked me the question, starting at the beginning, what were my initial thoughts? I think the first thing I wrote down was just the similar music. I think the Rankin and Bass Hobbit is almost universally adored for the most part.
It should be. If you don't adore it, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah. I think there's a handful of people who probably hate it, and that's their choice. But when the music kicked in for Return of the King, it was so similar to the Hobbit music that my mood immediately went from bad to good. So that was my initial thought off the top. What was your initial thought when your YouTube videos started?
My initial thought was, man, I hope this resolution gets better. And it did. And then I thought it was interesting to do the frame story. So the way that this movie starts is there's a narration from Gandalf, and he talks about the kind of battle in Middle Earth and doesn't go into a ton of detail. And then we cut to Gandalf has a line about saying, we will begin at the end. And there's a cut to Rivendell. It's Bilbo's 129th birthday, which it does take place in the final chapters of The Return of the King. And Bilbo is, there's a cake cutting and all sorts of stuff. And at some point, Bilbo asks Frodo about the ring, and Frodo says, "Oh, I lost it. I got rid of it." And then Bilbo notices that Frodo's missing a finger, and he says, "How did you lose the finger?" And then that's the setup for the introduction of the Minstrel of Gondor, who sings about Frodo of the Nine Fingers and the Ring of Doom.
Which I basically said, that's a Glenn Yarborough cameo, right?
I think it must be. The funny thing is, I remember I have seen bits and pieces of this movie on YouTube before, just little clips. And I remember seeing that. I was like, oh, that's so goofy. The Minstrel of Gondor and Frodo of the Nine Fingers. And forgive me, but I had not read The Return of the King in a long time. And I've been rereading it just recently, reading it out loud to Haley and our baby. And that is a scene in one of the chapters in Return of the King. It's a complete throwaway. I think it's one paragraph or just a handful of paragraphs. And it's really just a joke, because toward the end of the quest, I think it was shortly after, it was after they destroy the ring, and they're kind of waiting for the lava erupting from Mount Doom to get them. Sam and Frodo are talking, and Sam says, "I would have liked to have heard the tale of Frodo, the Nine Fingers, and the Ring of Doom." And he just kind of makes up that title. And then the Minstrel of Gondor uses that exact same title, and they have Sam kind of laughing at it because it was such a funny coincidence. So it's kind of this joke. I would say it was maybe Tolkien's way to inject a little bit of humor, which I appreciate it. But that's our framing device. And then we jump into the rest of the story. So we kind of know where it's all going. We get this frame, and then we jump into the story, and there's additional narration. And this is maybe one of the first choices in the adaptation where I could have used a little bit more detail here. I don't know about you. So they established Aragorn, but they did not do much with him at all. And that was actually kind of one of my overarching issues with the movie. Is I would have liked, for a movie called The Return of the King, we could have used a little bit more time with the king. But most of that narration is setting up the battle or the quest of the ring. And so we get a little bit of the Fellowship, or we get Bilbo finding the ring in the story of the Hobbit, and then we get the very beginning of the Fellowship, which is basically just Gandalf telling Frodo to go and destroy the ring. But there's no dialogue. It's all just shown kind of in images under their narration. Sean, what did you think about how we jumped into the movie here?
I was a little confused at the beginning. Granted, I was a little distracted because the DVD just kicks right into the movie. And, I'm getting my notes ready on my Google Doc so I can get typing. And then all of a sudden I see Frodo is missing the finger. And I didn't really catch on that the 129th birthday and with the narration that they were going forward in time. And the whole story was going to be like a flashback, more or less. But I was confused at first, and then once I got settled in, I was fine with it. But yeah, just a little confused, because I wrote down the same note about Aragorn. It's bold to barely use him, and on top of that, you barely see. You might not even see Legolas and Gimli.
There. That was one of my notes too. There's no Legolas and there's no Gimli. Hold on. There's other people too. We have no Legolas, no Gimli. We have no character named Faramir. I think there's somebody who's supposed to be Faramir there, but we don't. There's no interaction. Yeah. That character has no dialogue.
He's just at the very end. Yeah,
the very end, next to Eomer. There is no character named Eomer. I think there is an Eomer character. So one of the Rohirrim is prominently featured in a lot of scenes, but they have no lines. There's no.
Well, that's what I was going to say. That there might be a Legolas shot though, when Aragorn first returns on the ship, on the Corsair ship, and he's sitting in a tent outside of Minas Tirith. There's someone who we haven't seen before in the movie that's there as soon as Aragorn arrives, and they have very long blonde hair.
Okay.
And then throughout the rest of the movie, whenever you see Aragorn, like on horseback at the head of the army going forward, a few horses back, there's that same long-haired blonde character.
Okay. So that could be like
not appear Yeah. So I don't know.
Well, so I had a similar thought that there's another character that appears in, I think, in the kind of the last debate chapter where or the scene where they're talking about attacking Mordor and marching. And then later on in other scenes during that march, there's a character that has, I think, red or brown hair and a beard. I was thinking either that's either Gimli or it's Imrahil, because they didn't look particularly short, because the Rankin Bass folks go out of their way to draw dwarves in a certain manner. Like, dwarves are very distinct. And to that matter, the elves that we do see, Elrond primarily, is distinctly elvish. And then we talked about this when we talked about the Hobbit, because the elves in the Hobbit, the wood elves, were so
distorted.
Yeah. And we obviously didn't have that. We kind of figured what we talked about, how would they depict Legolas? They seemingly didn't really depict Legolas. There was a companion to Aragorn who could have been Legolas, but so that was a choice. So that you excised a lot of these characters that are
pivotal.
I mean, that are what?
Pivotal to the story.
Pivotal, yeah. I mean, Legolas and Gimli are kind of just there. I don't know if they're there as companions to Aragorn and kind of commenting and representing their respective races during the final battles. But Faramir and Éomer are pivotal in the actual stuff that happens. And
so I'll say, I think you could leave out Éomer because you're not covering the two towers.
That's true.
So at this point, like, if they would have done more covering the second book, and then they get to Return of the King, like the events of this movie, and then Éomer's not there, then I would be like, oh, that doesn't make sense. But when you only cover the third novel, I'm not saying you should, but it allows you to more successfully omit things if you haven't even introduced them yet. So I don't know.
That makes sense. You don't need Éomer. I think what you get, though, is a little bit of a scenes that escalate really quickly. I'm thinking specifically of the Denethor scenes, where that just goes from 0 to 10, and all of a sudden it's over, and there's really no impact because you don't have a Faramir. The stakes there don't include the life of Faramir as they do in the book and in the Jackson film as well. Denethor just shows up, starts going crazy, and then sets himself on fire seemingly, and we cut away from it. There's no stakes there. So yeah, a lot of things just kind of, especially at the beginning, things are just happening. Pippin and Merry, for instance. Pippin is just there in Gondor, seemingly plugged into what's happening, and then Merry is the messenger that delivers the arrow from Gondor to Theoden, summoning the Rohirrim to the aid of Gondor, which was, I guess, if you're going to make Merry do something important, that was pretty important. It was just a departure from the books and the other movies.
It was weird when Theoden dies then, and Merry gets so assaulted or insulted.
Yes.
And it's like, if you're just the messenger delivering the arrow, why are you so upset that your lord is dead?
Yeah.
And again, that just, there's not enough time for the events to make sense this movie is an hour and a half long. So yeah.
That is when, so I think the music and the songs in this movie did not resonate with me as much as they did in The Hobbit. And I think part of that is the songs in The Hobbit are taken right from Tolkien's story. And they're kind of fun, and it's a children's story. And the songs kind of fit the mood. The Return of the King is much more epic. Dark things happen. You've got people dying on the battlefield. You've got hopeless characters. You've got Sam and Frodo kind of in this, desperate quest across the desert in Mordor. And some of the songs, like the Where There's a Whip, There's a Way song. I was like, do we really need this like disco accompaniment to these orcs marching? It was just take a little bit of time there, and we could use that somewhere else to maybe give Aragorn something to do, like show him healing Éowyn or something like that. Because then at the end we have reference to him being a healer, but we never saw him heal anyone.
Well, that song Where There's a Whip, There's a Way was the only song that I remember. So yeah. I'm extrapolating that and saying That's the only song that I liked. If that's the only one that I can remember.
Okay. Well, so there's the song "The Bearer of the Wing," "The Bearer of the Ring," "The Wearer of the Ring,"
Yeah.
which that was just used to fill time.
Mm-hmm.
The fun thing about the songs in The Hobbit is they actually kind of either they were fun accompaniment to kind of chase scenes or movement scenes, or they kind of built the story. They added something to they added depth to what was happening. The songs and the poems that are in The Lord of the Rings do that on a level that would be very challenging to adapt in an animated movie, because so much of those things are reliant on a knowledge of the legendarium, or are then accompany things that are explained in detail in the chapter, and you don't want to spend a bunch of time explaining like who Beren and Luthien are when you've got 90 minutes in your movie. So their solution was to kind of put in these very very shallow songs to a certain extent, I would say. And it wasn't as effective as it was in The Hobbit, and I could have used some of that time in the movie for more scenes establishing the characters that we like from the books, and doing the things that we want to see depicted on screen.
Yeah. As we go through, another one in terms of animation that we talked about possibly being different were the Hobbit interpretation of goblins and then orcs. And they very clearly in the beginning of this movie animate them the same. And then Sam, I'm pretty sure, says something like, this is the goblins that Mr. Bilbo talked about.
Yeah. He basically equates them, and I guess you need to do that they did that for the audience, but you could just call them orcs and nobody would really be questioning. Either you've read the books or you haven't, but you can say orcs are the bad guys and people would follow.
But then the story, I want to talk about one change, I suppose, from Sam in the books and live action versus this. Sam, when Frodo gets taken up to Cirith Ungol, we have a hint of Shelob when he walks through that tunnel and there's spider webs. Yep. I thought for a moment we were going to get one-on-one Shelob and Sam, but we didn't get it. He just talks about a stinky tunnel that he just has to walk through.
Yeah, and then later Sam references your wound to Frodo, but it's not clear that he was wounded, and it's left a little ambiguous how Frodo even was taken to the tower in the first place. But yeah, I think I know where you're heading with this.
Just that he was captured. But then Sam has a moment where he just goes, pretty much, screw Frodo. He's in this tower.
Yeah.
I'm going to go destroy the ring. And then he has this super experience with temptation where he sees himself as like was it Sam the Strong? Isn't that
Sam the Strong? Yeah.
He calls himself. Yeah.
I actually like that.
That's a little
scene.
Different. Yeah.
I liked it because it showed what he would do with the power of the ring, and that he would turn the desert barren wasteland of Gorgoroth into a garden. So it showed like all of the kind of rocky landscape turning into green grass and rolling hills with flowering plants and fruit trees, and then it shows all of the orcs turning into little cuddly woodland animals which it's such an interest. Like I didn't love it, but it was humorous to a certain extent. Like this is the power fantasy of a gardener, of a simple hobbit gardener, is everything becomes nice and green, and then all those ugly orcs turn into chipmunks and sloths and lemurs. Yeah.
Oh yeah, the fucking lemur was so weird.
Yeah, it was great.
Apparently lemurs live in Middle Earth.
Yeah, but then of course he does decide to come back and rescue Frodo, and that all happens pretty similar to the book. And one scene that I really did like was him overcoming the Watchers, and infiltrating the tower. And he uses the Phial of Galadriel, but they don't ever call it the Vial or the Phial of Galadriel. It's just kind of mentioned as something that's magic, we don't get any reference to Lorien or the other uses of the Phial.
Yeah, that was a cool scene, and pretty much from the book,
Yeah,
We
very,
even have the
very.
reference to him being like an elvish warrior,
Mhm.
that confusion when he has the ring.
And one depiction that I really liked that they did both in the tower and then later on when they were confronting Gollum was they showed that in Mordor, you don't even have to wear the ring for it to affect how you're perceived. And so the orcs, or the one or two orcs that were alive in Cirith Ungol, saw Sam as more menacing than Sam might have seen himself because of the ring. And I think that's in the books too. Tolkien talks about how the closer the ring gets to Sauron and Mount Doom, the more amplified its effects are, and it kind of changes it changes your power basically in the seen world and not just the unseen world.
Do we think Frodo and Bilbo were voiced by the same voice actor?
I thought they were.
Yeah.
Orson Bean, especially in those early scenes when they were both talking. It seemed like it was just a slight variation in the tonation
to make Bilbo sound older. And
yeah.
Like I think if you put the Bilbo from The Hobbit and Frodo from Return of the King and have them talk at the same time, I'm pretty sure they'd be the same exact voice.
I think so. And then Casey Kasem is in this. I think he's Pippin.
Oh yeah,
I think so. Yeah, I know he's in it. I think he's one of the hobbits. But otherwise, most of the voice actors are the same from The Hobbit. Mm-hmm. So Gandalf is the same. I think was it Thurl Ravenscroft was the goblin voices and the singing goblins. I think he makes a reappearance.
Back,
voice acting was pretty good. It makes sense to me that two people who are related could be voiced by the same actor. That's no problem. It was noticeable. Okay, there's some other adaptation choices that we should talk about. And one of them is Frodo claims the ring. Frodo and Sam are in Mount Doom, and Frodo claims the ring during the Battle of Pelennor. Which
I know where you're going with this, and I know the answer to it.
Oh, okay.
So frame your question, and then I will give you the movie's answer to it.
Okay. So he claims the battle. He claims the ring during the Battle of Pelennor. That doesn't have any effect on the action, or that has. Well, we can talk whether or not it has an effect on the action on the battlefield. Then he wanders around Mount Doom for several days before Sam and Gollum find him at the same time. Gollum confronts him, bites his finger off, claims the ring, falls in, ring's destroyed. And that is happening at the same time as Aragorn leads the army to Morannon, or to the Black Gate, or the Towers of the Teeth, as they call it in this movie. There is no discussion about Sauron immediately sending all of his forces to Mount Doom once Sam claimed the ring. And then similar to that, it's not made clear that the reason they need to march on Mordor is to draw the armies out to clear a path for Sam and Frodo. So I guess I don't really have a specific question, but just why? Sean?
You didn't even go to the specific question that I thought you were going to have.
Take me there.
For me, it was Frodo claims the ring in the Cracks of Doom during the Battle of Pelennor Fields. And then Gandalf narrates that we marched days and nights to get to the Black Gate. And then he cuts back to Sam and says Sam had been looking for Frodo in the Cracks of Doom for days. To me, that was the biggest.
Oh yeah, no, that's like that wouldn't happen. Like that, it's very clear both in the Jackson movies and in the book that as soon as Frodo claims the ring, Sauron is aware of it, and that's why all the Nazgul then fly immediately to Mount Doom to try and get the ring. And it's a short time later, not many days, it's minutes, that Gollum bites his finger off and then falls in.
Yeah.
And
this is where I think it could have been fixed, is if you could have said between Cirith Ungol and the Cracks of Doom, it took days.
Yes.
The movie makes it seem like it's maybe 2 days, because there's 2 instances where they stop to rest.
Mm-hmm.
So have that be your, just line it up better with Pelennor Fields. And then you don't have to say that Sam was looking for Frodo for days.
Yeah.
Inside a volcano.
It doesn't make it doesn't make that doesn't make any sense. You also could have, if you had just had Pelennor happening as Sam and Frodo are traversing some of Mordor, then you wouldn't have to cut back and forth between the action on Mount Doom and the action of the Pelennor Fields. Like a lot of what happens in Pelennor, between all the Witch King stuff and the Ride of the Rohirrim, it's interspliced with things happening on Mount Doom, which that happens in movies all the time. But when you've already cut out a lot, it would kind of make it nice just to follow the action. You could have a little bit more time establishing Theoden and Éowyn and Merry and the three of them and the Witch King, and just show Aragorn doing something during that. Show him attacking the Corsairs. There's no reference at all to the army of the dead or Aragorn rallying the men of southern Gondor to fight the Corsairs and then arrive to the Battle of Pelennor Fields. So you didn't need it. And but then there's also these spillover effects of, there seems to have been no awareness that the ring had been claimed that changed Sauron's moves at all. And then why did Aragorn lead the army into, to attack Mordor? They didn't know that Frodo and Sam needed them to do that.
The distraction. Yeah.
Theoretically, they could have stayed where they were. Sam and Frodo were already inside Mount Doom. The ring was either going to or not going to be destroyed. It didn't matter that they marched on the Black Gate. So questionable adaptation decision there.
I wrote down, there's a cut scene where Sam decides that he's not going to do or take the ring and become Sam the Strong. And he has like a daydream of, I think he says the line, a free farmer only needs one plot of land or something to farm on. It was something along those lines. And then he cuts to him in Hobbiton with Rosie Cotton and then his children. And I just wrote down, the baby hobbits are so fucking cute. There was one on a toy horse. And I just kept thinking to myself, oh my gosh.
Quite
Grogu meets baby hobbit.
Yeah. I do want to, I know we've talked about some of the adaptation choices and how they were less than effective. I do want to say that there were several scenes that I thought were visually quite impressive. And actually depictions that I kind of, and I won't say I like them more than the live action, but I thought they were pretty well done. So the first one for me was Pelennor and the Pelennor Fields, and then the wall that surrounds them. They established the geography of Minas Tirith really well, and I like the depiction there showing the fortifications and the Pelennor itself, and then the walls of Minas Tirith. I thought that was good. And I really like the visuals of Éowyn versus the Witch King. I think one of the things that I reacted really negatively to in Ralph Bakshi was the complete lack of detail in the animation. And I think here they do a really good job of showing things like the filigree on swords or the wrinkles on people's hands, or in that scene, Éowyn and her hair flowing. It just looked really good. Really, and, you could tell that they put care into making that scene epic.
Yeah, and in that moment too, I caught the hack Jackson stealing something else in this.
Oh.
When she slays the fell beast, and then we have that scene of like the wings of the fell beast kind of flapping and the Witch King standing up. That's pretty shot for shot from the live action.
Oh, interesting. Well, let's move into that. There were a couple other times when I thought, oh, I've seen that before in the Peter Jackson films. The white tree of Minas Tirith in that courtyard.
Oh, did it look? I missed that. Did it look similar?
Very, very similar. The Corsair ships were very similar, just in the way that the way that the sails were arranged and the way that they looked, very similar to the Peter Jackson scenes. And then finally, and this is a pretty big one, the depiction of the Eye of Sauron. And in particular, the beams of his vision are clearly shown in this. And we saw this earlier in the Rankin Bass Hobbit with Smaug and his kind of his cones of vision. But Peter Jackson took that almost entirely and applied it to the Eye of Sauron in his movies. And we see the eye ray at several points looking around Mordor or looking at the Black Gate and other points throughout the three movies.
Mm-hmm.
Were there any other things that you saw as either Jackson inspirations or just visuals that you liked?
I mean, visuals that I liked, if we're comparing it to Bakshi, like we said, you had a quote from the Bakshi episode where you said, everything just looks like brown everywhere.
Yeah, it was barf colored.
But at least with this, like there's so much detail to everything. And that's what I took away. Like, for example, when Theoden and the Rohirrim are arriving to Pelennor Fields, it shows them like riding through the roads, and you see all these like destroyed buildings, and they're riding through like a war zone. If Bakshi would have done this, it would have been a few rotoscoped horsemen riding through just a brownscape with no detail. And then it would have been a narration like, oh, they're arriving at Pelennor Fields.
And
so
it would have been in slow motion,
yes,
inexplicably.
And maybe one of the rotoscope characters trips, and then they just leave it in.
Yeah, you see like an underwear shot for no reason.
So the detail was great, and it was throughout the entire movie. So I always felt like I had something good to look at,
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't getting bored by these long cut scenes of story and people moving and things like that. So a couple other things. I thought they used maps really well in this to show the action, and it reminded me of the scene in The Two Towers where Faramir and one of his rangers are looking at a map, and they kind of explain, Saruman is attacking Rohan over here, and Sauron is attacking Osgiliath here, and the audience gets to see how everything connects visually and geographically. They did that pretty well here, but the thing that really struck me was just how detailed those maps were. It's like they were taken right off the page, Tolkien's hand-drawn maps. Did you know that the map that they use in The Two Towers was from the back of one of the books?
Really? Like a special edition map?
No, just one of the maps
really?
from the back of a Lord of the Rings book. They took it out and put it down and used it.
See, that's why every aspiring fantasy author, you need to hand draw your maps. It helps.
It helps us suspend disbelief.
Yeah. For
sure.
All right, what else you got, Sean?
What else did I say? The Nazgul looked awful.
Oh, yeah. Except for the Witch King, the Nazgul looked too goofy.
Looked bomb, but the Nazgul kind of looked like skeletal old women with long white hair and red glowing eyes. And they rode like black Pegasus creatures. I
didn't, and the thing that gets me is you did the fell beast for the Witch King, and it looks like a pterodactyl, which is similar to how Tolkien describes them in the book, bird without feathers. So you didn't need to do the flying horses at all. You could have just had them all on fell beasts. But yeah, they looked like one of the animators' kids drew a skeleton, and they're like, yeah, let's just go with this. Yeah, that really fell short for me.
Yeah, so they looked awful. And like I said, I thought the Witch King looked good, but his voice reminded me too much of Skeletor.
It was too goofy.
And I know it's like the 80s. At the same time, Skeletor was being used in He-Man.
Is that right? He-Man? I was going to say, I think it's He-Man. Yeah.
He-Man was like late 70s, early 80s, I think. Because my mom watched He-Man, actually. So I was with it until I heard the Witch King talk, and then it took me out of it. But his visuals were awesome because he removes his hood, and it's basically like two glowing red eyes.
Yeah.
And they made it look like smoke was like billowing out, and he was wearing like a crown. It was dope.
Yeah, that was cool. The similar vein, but different character, the Mouth of Sauron. He had the winged helmet, or like kind of bat wings on his helmet, but then his horse had these long. His horse was wearing a helmet with these long horns.
That's dope.
It was really cool. And I think actually the first thing it reminded me of was some of the horses in the World of Warcraft. The undead horses in World of Warcraft looked like that. They have these exaggerated horn features, which would not, horses don't normally have horns like that, but you can do what you want in your fantasy undead world. So I thought that was fun.
Well, I just thought it looked like the horses were wearing like antelope skulls.
Yeah. That was because the horns were kind of ribbed and they tapered to a point at the end. It was really interesting.
Yeah, and the mouth of Sauron with that winged helmet, I thought that was very reminiscent of at least a callback to like the Black Numenorians.
Yeah.
What the mouth of Sauron was supposed to have come from.
Yep. And if you recall that the helmets of the faithful Numenorians and then the helmet of the crown of Aragorn, basically, and the helmet of the tower of the guard of the tower, those are supposed to have wings of seabirds on them. It's kind of an interesting, through a mirror darkly, one sect of Numenorian descendants has seabird wings on their helmets, and the other sect has these, bat wings. That was fun. Speaking of birds, we have the eagles appear, just like they do in the book and in the films. And instead of just showing up to help at the Battle of the Black Gate and then to rescue Sam and Frodo, the eagles literally carry everybody back to safety.
The entire army. I remember watching that and just thinking, how many goddamn eagles are there?
Yeah. I mean, maybe, yes, always great when the eagles show up. Little much to have them ferry the entire army back to safety. Also, was there even a battle? I don't even think they were fighting at that point.
No, they were about to.
Yeah.
Because they were just showing the orcs arriving on the battlements, and then that's when Gollum falls in.
Yeah. All right. I'm just looking through my notes and okay. Couple last bone to pick. Pronunciation.
Yes.
It's Cirith
Ungol. I didn't write it down, but I agree.
Yeah, it's Cirith Ungol, not Cirith Ungol.
And do you have the other one?
Gorgoroth?
Okay, so Gorgoroth, but there's a third one.
What is it?
Minas Tirith.
Yes. And even Rohan was Rohan, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just guys.
Rankin and Bass did this with The Hobbit too, because we had the same note. We were like, the Tolkien in the books gives you pronunciation guides. All you have to do is spend 5 seconds, look at that page, and know how to pronounce these things.
Yeah, we in the Bakshi version, they had was Celeborn, right? And
yeah, that's a hard C.
They mispronounced Edoras as well. The thing that got me was Gorgoroth. They kept saying Gorgoroth incorrectly. It was like Gorogoroth or something like that. You added a syllable there that doesn't belong.
Yeah, they added an O. It was Goro.
Yeah.
Goroth.
There was that. I think, and that's all I have.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else?
I've got a couple that I have bones to pick.
Let's pick them.
To start, Denethor's Theoden's death was super weak.
Oh yeah.
Because it was just a Nazgul screeching up in the clouds and made his horse spook and killed him. Like he just fell off his horse and died.
Yeah, and like it in the book, his horse rears up because of the presence of a Nazgul. I think specifically the Witch King. But then it's shot with an arrow and it falls on him and crushes him.
Yeah.
In this, his horse rears up and he falls off and the horse kind of scampers away, I think.
Yeah, the horse doesn't fall on him. He just falls off his horse and dies.
It also, that point, at that wasn't clear to me if that was the Witch King or if that was something coming out of Mordor.
It was just a Nazgul.
Might
not even been the Witch King.
Yeah.
It was
and that's an example of something where take 30 seconds from where there's a whip, there's a way, and give Theoden an epic death.
Yeah.
Right. Give him, just do what they did in the book, and it would have been better than him falling off his horse.
Mm-hmm. What else do I have? There's a line where Sam says, "God help us." Immediately took me out of the moment.
Yep.
Don't have your fantasy creatures reference a monotheistic religion that is in the real world.
Well, and then there was another, I think Gandalf had a scene where he said something about hell or the devil or Satan
The
or something
devil,
like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's the devil himself.
I mean, if you want to, yeah, Tolkien has a creator deity and he has kind of the Satan figure, but they're not named. They're not called God and the devil. And they're only ever vaguely referenced in Lord of the Rings in the book. Yeah, that was which is funny because there are other moments where they take dialogue directly from the book.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have to use kind of a modern saying there. You could have worked around it. Yeah.
I also preferred the escape scene with Sam and Frodo when they're in the marching battalion of orcs. In the movies, the live action film, Frodo and Sam like start a fight with each other and it just riles people up and then they just crawl away. But in this, there's another battalion of humans walking down the road in Gorgoroth. And they
it's Gorgoroth.
Gorgoroth. And there's kind of a confrontation between the two captains of the two battalions. And the human, very racistly, talks down to the orc. And then Sam walks up to the orc captain and is like, hey, you're going to take that? No, you got to kill him, skin him, stab him. And then he gets the two armies to like fight each other, which I thought was a much cooler interpretation of how they get out. It's not some like fluky two orcs pushing each other and then they escape. It's we're going to create a real diversion here. And it shows the distrust between like the armies of evil that they're not really united and they're forced into doing what they're doing.
Yeah, which I agree with you. I like that a lot. And it reminds me in the book, the conflict within Cirith Ungol, the Tower of Cirith Ungol, is between orcs from Minas Morgul and orcs from the Tower. And I think there's Uruks versus lesser orcs, and they're fighting over the mithril coat of Frodo. And it does a really good job of establishing evil does not, there is no loyalty. There is no brotherly love between groups of evil people. And it can easily devolve into this, complete slaughter, which it basically does. And they hit that a couple times with obviously the conflict there, the conflict with the between the orcs and the Uruks who are carrying Merry and Pippin to Isengard, and then again at that crossroads where there's that conflict. And I think I don't recall in the book I don't think Sam and Frodo had a role in agitating the conflict in order to escape. They just kind of were there and it happened. It does beggar belief a little bit in how well disguised were Sam and Frodo.
Because their faces weren't covered. At least in the live action, they had masks.
They had masks, yeah. So whatever. That was the point of it was not, their disguises weren't good. The point was, kind of fostering that conflict between evil. Yeah, I like that as well.
And my last quick points here. It seemed like a joke had this animated film come out after the live action. Because in the live action, we have the scene where Sam gives Frodo water. And then when Frodo pours it onto his mouth, like only half of it goes into his mouth and the rest like falls. And everybody's like, what the fuck, Frodo? Like, drink water normally. Don't spill half of what you have left. But in the scene in the animated movie, there's a scene right after Frodo drinks some water where he like twitches a little bit and he kicks over the water bottle and it like pours onto the ground like a shit ton of water. And I just thought if this would have come out afterwards, that would have been a really funny homage or joke.
Yeah. I can't remember if they waste any water in Mordor during the trek. There's that water is an issue. And I think like in the tower in the book, the orcs like slash up Frodo's water bottle. And so Sam is constantly trying to find water while they're crossing Mordor and like testing it to see. It's actually kind of like a little survival skills, like Sam showing off his survival talents.
And I will say with the hobbits, I'm happy that they are individualized, although I don't like the look of Pippin.
Yeah, a little too exaggerated. His tall neck and head and everything.
His head was like elongated, and at least Frodo, Merry, Sam, Bilbo all have like roundish, bulbous heads. And then all of a sudden, Pippin just is like really tall, lanky, and weird looking. Didn't enjoy that, but at least he was individualized.
Yeah, you could tell who was
Bakshi.
who.
Yeah.
Oh, there
And
was one
then,
scene. Did you catch this? It was on the battlefield during Pelennor when I think Pippin comes out and finds Merry and says and calls him Proud Merry, which I thought was funny. I just thought of the Creedence Clearwater Revival song.
oh, no, that didn't hit me as I was watching it. In my last note, does Gandalf really say at the end of the movie that hobbits will turn into humans?
Yeah, I saw that too.
How did you not write that down in your notes?
Oh, I did, didn't I?
I don't think so. We haven't talked about it yet.
Yeah, it's hobbits getting bigger? Question mark.
Yeah, like what the
Under
fuck is
baffling
that?
adaptation choice. So yeah,
Not just baffling adaptation choice. That is like, if we're going to complain about Rings of Power lore divergence, this is like an extreme divergence.
It's not just a passing remark either. Gandalf like, look, Frodo is taller than Bilbo, and Sam is taller than Frodo, and
he's basically saying this isn't just like eventually evolution in millions of years you'll be humans. This is like every generation you guys are getting bigger.
Yeah,
one day you will be humans.
Like, if evolution is real, then why aren't all the monkeys right now turning into humans? Yeah, I mean, maybe there's something there with the Ent draught and how Merry and Pippin who drink it do get taller, but that is obviously not, that's something that happens in the Two Towers. There's no reference to the Ents and Treebeard and the Ent draught at all in this movie. So it is kind of a strange thing to say. And then you're again focusing on the hobbits that had no interaction with the Ents and using it to illustrate how, I guess it's kind of like a way to explain. Is that in the context of the elves are all leaving? And
yeah,
I think it's like the age of man is beginning, and then there's like well, how are hobbits going to fit in? It's like, well, maybe you will become men because you're getting taller. I think that was kind of the explanation. He
doesn't say maybe. He's like, he pretty much
Gandalf
tells Sam,
knows, right? Gandalf knows the God's plan.
Because he specifically says that like hobbits are the closest thing to humans. And that maybe one day you will become them. And it's like, what?
Yeah, it was a weird way to end. Just get Bilbo on the ship, right?
Get the fuck out of there, Gandalf.
Yeah. Leave Middle Earth. Get out of here.
Fuck up anything else.
Okay, fine. One final little nitpick. Gandalf rides Shadowfax with a saddle and a bridle.
You can't bridle Shadowfax.
Shadowfax.
He's unbridleable.
Yeah. Overall, though,
thoughts?
I liked it. There were, if you it is one where I think in our kind of pre-recording conversation, you were talking about suspension of disbelief, right? Which is something that continuously was a challenge with the Amazon show, the Ralph Bakshi, that movie. I dare anybody to suspend disbelief and immerse yourself in that movie. This adaptation, it's possible. It's very possible. There are a couple of moments which are kind of like, well, that doesn't make any sense. I think especially if you've read the book and you're very familiar with how things go, some of this is like, okay, that's a little nonsensical. Overall, this was a good effort. I'm glad they did it. Yeah. What are your overall thoughts?
I enjoyed it. I could watch this again. Unlike the Bakshi movie, which I think will now just sit on my shelf.
If your future children ever act up, their punishment is watching the Bakshi Lord of the Rings.
And like I said at the beginning of this episode, the biggest bummer for me is that now I wish we would have had a Rankin and Bass fellowship in Two Towers.
Yeah.
Because I love The Hobbit. I thought this did really well, and had two adaptations before it, I think they would have knocked it out of the park. Because everything that we're complaining about, there's no backstory.
Yep.
So I understand how hard it was for them to just jump into The Return of the King without having covered the other two. So I take it with a huge grain of salt. We've talked about the things that we didn't like in the adaptation decisions, but overall, yeah, I think I really enjoyed it, and I would watch this one again, hands down.
The thing that has been driven home for me is that we are very lucky that we got the Peter Jackson trilogy that we got. And had it not been for these animated movies, and had it not been for some of the kind of studio decisions and the back and forth, we could have gotten a very compromised live action. So I'm glad that Peter Jackson was able to watch this movie, watch the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings, make the decision to really advocate for 3 movies. Did you know that originally the Weinsteins, the Miramax, they were trying to push him to make 1 movie, and neither of them had read the books. Neither Bob nor Harvey had read the books. And there were all of these nonsensical suggestions about how to cut it down. It's like, well, first of all, you got to kill one of the 4 hobbits. You got to, for the drama of it. And then Gondor and Rohan should be the same country. Like, all of the scenes in Moria should be cut out. Just all of these like, you obviously have never read the books. You have no appreciation for what you're talking about. And then eventually they found, I think it was somebody at New Line, I cannot remember his name, was like, no, this needs to be 3. We're going to give you the money to make 3, and then really put a lot of energy behind the production. But we're just so lucky that you had at least these initial forays into adapting it. Granted, it's not live action, but you saw like it. You can't try to do it all in one movie. You need to set these things up. There are certain things that have to be included. And, to be quite frank, what are the things that are not in this movie? There's no scouring of the Shire at the end, right? There's you have some of that stuff excised that you could get away with. You could get away with cutting it in a film version, and it would be fine. And I think, Jackson, rightly so, took that lesson as well.
Well, which of the 4 hobbits would you have killed?
Is that what you're thinking about?
That's this whole time. I'm just,
which hobbit dies?
Your whole tangent. I'm just thinking to myself, which one would I kill?
Probably Pippin.
I'd do Frodo.
Kill Frodo, because Sam can just finish the quest on his own.
Sam pretty much does. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean So there's a
no hate, Elijah Wood, huge fan.
Yeah,
but I'd kill Frodo.
Yeah, kill him. Well, I mean, he dies anyway.
We all die anyway.
Speaking. Well, yeah, but he dies. He's not going to last long on Valinor. You know that. There's a YouTube channel called Men of the West, who I really like. He puts out a lot of Lord of the Rings Legendarium content. He did a Amazon series, reaction video for each episode, and he does a lot of these kind of conjecture videos of how, what would have happened if Faramir had joined the Fellowship instead of Boromir, and what would have happened if Gandalf hadn't fallen to the Balrog, or what would have happened if, so on and so forth. And a lot of the conclusions are things needed to happen the way that they did happen. Otherwise, the story, it's so much conjecture, but basically everybody had a role to play. Maybe with the exception of Legolas and Gimli. Everybody had a critical role to play. You think about what Pippin did. Pippin saved Faramir. Merry helped slay the Witch King. Obviously, what we know what Sam and Frodo did, and all of those things happened as a result of some earlier decision or circumstance that maybe wasn't favorable. Like if Merry and Pippin hadn't been abducted by the Uruk-hai and Boromir had died, would Rohan have been saved? Right? Would the Battle of Helm's Deep had gone the way it did? Would Gondor have survived? So there's a bunch of these. I mean, we can maybe a future episode we can talk about kind of Tolkien's approach to story writing and some of his ideas that he applied in crafting the Lord of the Rings. But I'm glad that we get the adaptations of this story, which is complicated and hard to adapt. And we encourage people to get out there and engage with these movies. If you've never seen them before, find them, buy the DVDs on Amazon. Maybe don't watch it on YouTube with the Turkish subtitles, but definitely get out there and see the Rankin Bass Return of the King.
Looking ahead, Sam, what are we going to cover next week?
I think we're going to cover the Dungeons and Dragons movie. Talking about theatrical releases that could have gone slightly differently. So what is it? This was released in 2001, I think.
Yeah, so we have the live action D&D movie from about 20 years ago. And then that will lead us into the live action D&D movie that comes out in March, this next month. So as we're looking at things to cover in the short term, we will be doing the live action D&D movie, and then we will take an episode to just talk about why fantasy. Why do we love fantasy? Why do we want to talk about it? That might be just like a shorter episode as Sam is preparing for his baby.
That's right.
So yeah, those are the next two. Thank you for sticking with us for this episode. And if you haven't watched Rankin and Bass Return of the King, we suggest that you do so.
Indeed. Thank you for listening. If you like what you heard, follow us on all the places, Facebook, YouTube, your podcasting app. Leave us a review, share us with your friends. If you'd like to become a subscriber, please do so. In the meantime, we will see you next week.
See you, everybody.
Bye.